Hello, hello. Okay, we're back. Isn't it wonderful? I know you're probably not binging these videos like you would a Netflix series, but um, maybe if I made that little Netflix noise at the beginning, it would help. I'm kidding. Um, anyway, I'm making a lot of them right in a row, obviously. Um, from the t-shirt, you can tell I'm wearing the same t-shirt. Um, Anyway, maybe I'll try to fool you by getting up and changing t-shirts in the middle of it. So you think I'm doing this on different days, even though I'm not. um, we'll be continuing the next video here on in the series on Achaean Greece, um, which is one of my favorite parts of the course. Uh, and I know it's yours. I can just tell. Um, anyway, this time we're going to be talking a little bit about the classical period and specifically the rise of Athens, but we're doing a lot of other stuff too. I probably should. I'm going to talk. Let me put this here. The uh, Greek versus Persian War. Okay, which runs from about 500 to about 450 BCE, of course. Um, okay. Um, and the rise of Athens, which happens kind of because of the Greek and Persian War. So, anyway, I really miss having a whiteboard, but in a pinch, PowerPoint has been serving me fairly well. Anyway, so let's talk about that. Um, the classical period is so called because a a period of remarkable cultural production in in Greece at the time, and a lot of that in Athens, honestly. Um, in the Mycenaean era, the city of Mycenae, or the center, the palace at Mycenae, rather, was sort of the dominant force. But Sparta, which you may have heard of if you watched the terrible movie 300, Sparta was also a really big deal in that period. And when we first come into the Achaean period, Sparta is sort of the dominant city state, the dominant polis in Greece. Sparta was kind of a fascist dictatorship with two kings, but it was a constitutional monarchy, meaning that even Sparta had the rule of law, as discussed in the last video. Um, but Sparta was a sort of military uh, proto-fascist state where most of the people who lived in it were not citizens, and a military elite controlled everything. Um, anyway, and Athens and Thebes, who were two of the other cities, two of the other polling in Greece, were still on their way up. And one of the things, the big thing that's going to change all of that during the classical period is the war between the Greeks and the Persians. Um, and there's going to be a big reshuffling of sort of which cities are the most prominent, which cities are not as a result of that. So let's dig into that. Um, in the period that we would call the Archaic period of Greece, during that period, way to the east, in Persia, which is now what we would call Iran, in Persia, there was developing the Persian Empire, which is an autocracy that was becoming a very big deal. And the Persian Empire spread out, and in the era after the Dark Age or Bronze Age collapse, during, like I said, what would be the Archaic period of Greece, in that period of time, Persia spread all over Mesopotamia and the eastern Mediterranean, um, into what we would now call um, Israel and Palestine and Syria and places like that. Um, Persia was a big deal, in other words. It was a huge empire. At that time, it was the largest empire that had ever existed. Um, it was militarily just incredibly powerful because they had they just had a huge military. They weren't the most technologically or tactically advanced, but they were enormous and powerful. So, around 500, Persia has conquered pretty much every bit of land that is considered properly civilized land. Um, you have to remember, civilization in Mesopotamia goes back to 3500 BCE. So by this point, they're conquering areas where the tradition of civilization goes back 3,000 years. That was considered the center of the world, where all the really important culture was happening. Greece was instead a kind of rocky, pointless little backwater. Uh, uh, in other words, it was Muskogee. No, I'm kidding. I mean, a little bit. Um, Morgan said somewhere in the panhandle. Ouch. Rude. Um, Accurate, though. But no, yeah. I like to pick on Muskogee, even though I'm a good fan of the Renaissance Fair. I like to pick on Muskogee, so I always compare it to Muskogee. But anyway, but no, Greece was a backwater. It was way out on the western end of what most people in that period of time would have considered the civilized world, and it wasn't very rich and it wasn't very significant. So around 500, Persia has conquered all of what we would now call Turkey, the Anatolian peninsula, what we would now call Turkey. And Persia rolls up and knocks on the door of some Greek colonies in Turkey, the Ionian colonies. Here, let me put some of that stuff on the PowerPoint. Um, uh, Persia has conquered the Anatolian Peninsula, which is modern day Turkey, and let me erase that. And it is trying to take over Greek colonies, the Ionian colonies. Okay, in Turkey, or Anatolian Peninsula. Okay, so that's where we are. with things. Around 500. Um, oh, there we go. Sorry, I put all that stuff on the PowerPoint. Stop that. Um, so Persia conquered the Anatolian Peninsula, trying to take over the Greek colonies, the Ionian colonies. Okay. Sorry, I thought I had the PowerPoint pulled up when I was typing that, and I didn't. But now you can see it. Anyway, back to our story. Persia tries to conquer the Ionian colonies, and it kind of does, or takes over. And it says, hey, we're an empire ruled by an autocrat, so now you have to obey the autocrat. Um, because he is the god emperor and he's the ruler of all things. And the Ionian colonies say, no, thank you. Not just because they don't want to be conquered by a foreign power, but because of something particular to the Greeks. And I mentioned in the last video, and what do you think it is? That's right. I'll assume you all said the correct answer. It's the rule of law. Um, the rule of law. Remember the rule of law. Now, if you'll recall, the rule of law is the idea that the law does not exist in any one person. It exists because it was created through a proper procedure, and the law has a force of its own in and of itself without any dependence on a particular person. In other words, the rule of law is antithetical. That's a fun vocabulary word for today. It is antithetical to the idea of autocracy. Autocracy is, as I've discussed in previous videos, autocracy is the idea that there is a single all-powerful ruler and who owns everything in the world and is entitled to do or say anything he wants to do or say, and that the law is what he says it is when he says it is, and that's just that. Um, and that obviously is something that cannot coexist with the rule of law. So these Greek colonies resisted Persian conquering not just because they didn't want to be conquered by somebody else, which is pretty reasonable, but also because their way of life, the rule of law, was inherently opposed to what the Persian Empire represented. It was inherently opposed to the way that they did things in the Persian Empire. So, okay, what happens next? Well, what happens next is interesting and remarkable. So what happens next in the Greek and Persian War, Greek versus Persian War, the Greco-Persian War, is that the Greek city-states are going to band together. Uh, the Greek city-states band together. And this is notable because the Persians had a lot of success with conquering Mesopotamia because they had undermined the various city-states of Mesopotamia individually. By which I mean that if they went to Babylon and Babylon doesn't like Assur, so instead of Babylon and Assur cooperating to fight Persia, Persia would come along and say, "Hey, Babylon, we'll help you fight Asser if you'll, cooperate with us." And Babylon would go, "Cool," and they would conquer Asser, and then Persia would turn on Babylon, obviously, and no one ever seemed to catch on to this trick, which is kind of stupid, but there you go. Anyway, sorry. Oh, okay. Um, Morgan had a smart little history comment there. Anyway, um, the Persians had conquered all of Mesopotamia by dividing and conquering, in other words. And the Greeks were going to resist in a united front, but it wasn't they weren't originally going to do this. The masterminds behind this plot uh, the mastermind behind this plot was Athens. And Athens rallied together the Greek city-states into a kind of NATO like structure where they all a mutual defense organization called the League of Delos or the Delian League. Uh, Athens basically proposed that they fight together, and the way that they were able to rally everyone into this mutual defense organization was by appealing to their common Greekness. They said, "Hey," they said, "we're all Greek. We may not like each other and we may fight with each other." And they did a lot. But they said, "We're all Greek. We speak the same language. We share the same culture. And in particular, we share the rule of law." Right? That's the key to Greek culture, that we share this rule of law. And that there is a common Greek culture that is worth defending and worth fighting for. This idea that there is a common Greek culture worth defending and fighting for is called Pan-Hellenism. Um, Pan meaning all, and Hellene meaning Greek. And let me put a new slide up. And uh, no, I don't want that. I want that. Let me put a new slide up. And in Greek, a Hellene or Hellas is Greece in Greek. Are you still looking at? Yeah, okay. You're still looking at that. Hellas is Greece in Greek. That's the place. A Hellene is a Greek person. Hellenic is Greek as an adjective, and Hellenism is Greekness, if you will. So, what we have then is when we say Pan-Hellenism equals all, that's the Pan, plus Greekness. That's the Hellenism. All Greekness. Okay, so this is the idea that Athens used to rally together the rest of the Greek city-states. Pan-Hellenism. The idea that Greek culture, that there is a commonly shared culture among all Greeks, that is worth fighting for and worth defending. And at the core of that commonly shared culture is the rule of law. That was the bit that really, that was the really important bit, the rule of law. Okay, so when Persia comes knocking at the door. Athens gets everybody together in the League of Delos by appealing to Pan-Hellenism. And all the Greek city-states, it worked. It worked. All the Greek city-states pay money into the League of Delos so that Athens, which is sort of in charge of the League of Delos, can uh, uh, distribute the money and the military forces in a way that will be maximally efficient against the Persian defenses. I'm sorry, you couldn't see that. I was marking on the PowerPoint again. The League of Delos, Athens got everybody together in the League of Delos by using Pan-Hellenism. Um, and so, okay. Um, so the war goes on for about 50 years. This tiny little backwater of the known world fighting the largest empire that the world had ever known to that point. The crazy thing is, the absolute bonkers thing is, they won. The Greeks won. They didn't destroy the Persian Empire or anything, but they resisted being conquered. They got the Persian Empire to back off. um, and that was absolutely astonishing. That would be as if I've compared Greece as a backwater to Muskogee. That would be like the U.S. Army rolls up to Muskogee and tells them they're going to take over, and the Muskogee Sheriff's Department fights them off successfully. It was bonkers. So this is a crazy bonkers win for the Greeks. And Athens, because they were in charge of the League of Delos, Athens gets a lot of the credit for that. Athens gets the credit for masterminding this victory via the League of Delos. And that is one reason why Athens becomes a focus of attention in the latter part of the classical period. Between about 450 and 400, Athens is sitting pretty and is a center of culture and trade, and just everybody wants to be their friend and to know what's going on there because they pulled off the impossible. They beat the Persian Empire. During this period, Athens goes through a golden age, a remarkable period of cultural productivity. During about 50 years, Athens produces more important philosophers and artists and writers than probably Rome does in 1,000 years. It's just astonishing. We see the development of the roots of modern medicine. We see the development of sort of the high water mark of Greek sculpture, which will set the pattern for sculpture even into today. I'll talk about that more in the Greek art video. We see the full development of classical drama, which sets the pattern for drama even now. We see Greek philosophy that will still be studied 2,000 years later. It's just an astonishing period of time. And ironically, part of the reason that Athens was so glorious and successful in the aftermath of the Greco-Persian War is that when they were in charge of the League of Delos, they were embezzling money like maniacs. They were stealing the League of Delos blind in order to make Athens better, to build monuments, to build temples, to fund all kinds of public works projects. The Athenians were absolutely crooks. They were stealing them blind. Probably, though, one of the most important developments during this period of this sort of golden age of Athens is the development of a new form of the rule of law called something you might have heard of, called democracy. Democracy developed in Athens in the classical era, and it comes from the word demos, which means, the word demos, which means the crowd, um, and the crazy part, um, is the rule. The crazy part is the rule. The rule of the crowd. Uh, Democracy was a hugely important development in Athens that's going to be very influential later on. And it was just that the rule of law, laws were made by citizens who constituted about 30% of the total population. The citizens had to be natural born Athenians, and they had to be men, and they had to be like landowners and stuff or whatever, or meet a certain requirement. But Athenian democracy was considered a unique and very amazing cultural achievement on the part of the Athenians during this glory days, during this golden age in the post uh, uh, and the post Greco-Persian War era. Um, so Athens during this period from about 450 to 400, is undergoing an amazing cultural period of cultural development and cultural production that will be hugely influential on all of Western civilization. What it did mean, though, was that the city in Greece that had been the most prominent city at the beginning of the Greco-Persian War, which is Sparta. Sparta had been kind of the top dog in Greece when the war began. Sparta was now being eclipsed by Athens. Athens was the new darling, the big dog now in Greece, and Sparta was no longer as important as it used to be. So in the latter part of the 5th century, that is in the late in the 400s, um, the low 400s, in other words, from about 430 or so to 410 or thereabouts, 400 or thereabouts. Um, Sparta got jealous of Athens, basically, and with some justification given how Athens had been stealing from everybody when they were in charge of the League of Delos. They got jealous of Athens, and they started a war with Athens that went on for a long time. The irony here is that Sparta fought Athens for a long, long time, and they couldn't win because Athens had dominance over the sea, and as long as they controlled the seas, they could continue to supply themselves. Sparta could besiege Athens and burn the crops, and Athens could still bring in food via the water because Sparta would not have known how to run a navy if it had bit them on the ass. Um, so the war dragged on and on and on, and eventually Sparta recruited allies to help them defeat Athens. And who do you think Sparta recruited as an ally? Persia! Sparta recruited, so basically negating the entire victory of the Greco-Persian War. Sparta did exactly what Persia wanted them to do to begin with. Sparta said, hey, Persia, help us defeat Athens, surely no bad thing will happen because of that. Surely no leopards will eat my face. And then, as soon as Persia had helped Sparta defeat Athens, Persia came in and conquered the rest of Greece. Super good planning. Okay. So, there ends the golden age of Athens, around 400. And for the rest of the classical period, which lasts until 323, and I'll tell you why in the next video, why it's so specific there. For the rest of the classical period, Greece is sort of under Persian dominance. I say sort of because Greece is at the far end of the Persian Empire, and also the Persians actually weren't too hard on the people that they conquered. Basically, Greece had to pay tribute to Persia, but it wasn't exactly, Persia wasn't like coming in and making them do everything the Persian way. They still lived as Greeks. It's just that they had to acknowledge the superiority of the Persian emperor, which they didn't like to do because of the rule of law. And the rule of law suffered a lot during this period. A period where there was the rule of tyrants, which is a Greek term for people who ruled in an autocratic fashion. Anyway, so basically what happens is during this classical era, from about 500 to about 323, or to 323, is what happens is from about 500 to 450, we have the Persian War. From about 450 to 400, we have the Golden Age of Athens, where Athens is undergoing massive cultural development that we are still feeling the influence of today. And I'll talk about some of that in the art video. And I talk about democracy, which is one of the major cultural developments during this period that we still feel the influence of, via the Romans primarily. And then we have from about 400 to 323, we have the period where Greece is under the domination of Persia, and it's not really as free as it could be. So that's the classical era. Hopefully now you'll have everything you need to answer the questions related to that. And I will pause briefly before I start my next video. So have fun. Awesome. Bye.